The last thing my son-in-law said to me before he had security escort me out of the building was, "You should have retired 2 years ago, old man." I was 53. I had 31 years in the oil and gas industry, the last 19 of them at Norwest Energy Solutions in Calgary. I had built, from the ground up, a subsurface data management system that the company had been licensing to 3 of the largest pipeline operators in Western Canada. That system, the architecture, the code base, the field integration protocols, was worth, conservatively, somewhere north of $40 million. And I still owned it. That's the part my son-in-law forgot to check before he fired me. My buddy Terrence and I were sitting at the bar at Mercer's on 17th when I told him the whole story. It was a Thursday in late October, and the Flames game was on with the sound off, and Terrence kept shaking his head slowly the way he does when something is both completely predictable and completely unbelievable at the same time. "Walk me through it again," he said. "Which part?" "All of it," so I did. "My name is Arthur Webb. I grew up in Red Deer, went to the University of Calgary for petroleum engineering, graduated in early 90s right into the tail end of a downturn, which meant my first 2 years in the industry were a masterclass in doing more with nothing. I joined Norwest as a mid-level data analyst in 2005 when the oil sands were booming and everybody was hiring. By 2009, I was running their entire subsurface data division. The work was unglamorous. Nobody writes magazine profiles about the people who build data management architecture, but it mattered enormously. When you're dealing with seismic data across multiple plays, when you've got regulatory submissions, environmental monitoring, lease records, and production logs all living in different systems built in different decades, you need someone who can make all of that talk to each other. That was me. In 2013, I proposed something bigger, a unified platform. One system that could handle everything from raw seismic ingestion to regulatory reporting, with field terminals that could sync in near real time even in remote locations with patchy connectivity. The CEO at the time, a man named Hartwell who had actually worked in the field before he ran a company, listened to my full pitch and then said, "Do it. What do you need?" I needed a team of 4, a budget of about $800,000 spread over 3 years. And something that turned out to be more important than either of those things, I needed to retain intellectual property rights over the core architecture. Hartwell agreed. It was in my contract, written plainly, reviewed by both our legal teams. The logic was simple. If I was going to spend years of my life building something that went beyond my standard job description, something that Norwest would benefit from enormously, but that I was developing largely on my own initiative and my own time in the early stages, then the underlying IP should reflect that. Norwest got a perpetual exclusive license to use the system for their internal operations. Any external licensing, selling access to other companies, required my sign-off and a revenue-sharing arrangement. It worked beautifully for years. We licensed to 3 major pipeline operators across Alberta and BC. Each deal brought Norwest somewhere between $800,000 and $2 million annually. My share was structured as part of my compensation package, a combination of salary, bonus, and a percentage of licensing revenue. By 2024, that revenue share, combined with my base, put me well into the $200,000 range per year. More importantly, there was a clause in my contract that upon each licensing renewal, which happened every 3 years, I received a significant one-time payment as part of the renewal bonus structure. One of those renewals was scheduled for November 15, 2024. The payment associated with it was $112,000. I was fired on November 13th. Here is what I knew about my son-in-law before he joined the company. His name is Brennan. He married my daughter, Kelsey, in 2019 at a vineyard outside Kelowna. I paid for a third of the wedding because that felt fair and because Kelsey asked me to. He was pleasant enough, worked in commercial real estate in Vancouver, had good handshake, laughed at the right moments. I never disliked him. I never particularly worried about him either. What I did not know, what nobody told me, was that Richard, who had taken over as CEO after Hartwell retired in 2021, had been quietly grooming Brennan to move into a senior operations role at Norwest. Richard had known Brennan's father through the Calgary Petroleum Club for decades. Apparently, conversations had been happening for well over a year before any of it became official. I found out Brennan had joined as VP of Operations when Kelsey mentioned it at Easter dinner in 2024. Casually, between passing the roasted potatoes and asking if I wanted more gravy. "Brennan's been at Norwest for 6 weeks," she said. "Did you know? He's loving it." I had not known. I went into the office the following Tuesday and confirmed it through the internal directory. Brennan was listed as VP, Operations, Western Division. My division. I told myself it would be fine. Nepotism in this industry wasn't exactly rare. If he stayed in his lane and learned the business properly, there was no reason it had to be a problem. Family is complicated. I decided to give it time. What I should have done was call my lawyer. The first sign of trouble came in September. Brennan had been sitting in on our team's quarterly review meetings since July. He rarely said much. He asked occasional questions that revealed he understood commercial real estate very well and oil and gas data infrastructure not at all. That was fine. That was expected. You learn by listening. Then in September, he stopped listening and started talking. He had a presentation. Slides, actually, the kind with a lot of white space and bold numbers and arrows going up and to the right. The core idea was what he called a platform consolidation strategy. He wanted to take the system I'd built and bring its development fully in-house, meaning Norwest would stop treating it as a licensed external asset and reclassify it as internal proprietary infrastructure. The licensing agreements with the 3 pipeline operators would be restructured. The revenue share arrangements, my revenue share arrangements, would be phased out. He said this in the meeting without looking at me once. Afterward, I went to Richard's office and closed the door. "Did you see his presentation?" I asked. "I did. You understand that what he's describing isn't legally possible without renegotiating my contract." Richard leaned back. He had the look of a man who had been hoping this conversation wouldn't happen. "We'd want to do this collaboratively, Arthur. Nobody's trying to cut you out." That's exactly what that presentation described. Let's give it some time. Brennan's enthusiastic. He's still learning the landscape. I left that office with a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. The feeling of watching something approach from a distance and knowing you're the only one who can see it clearly. I called my lawyer that evening. Her name is Deborah, and she has been handling my professional agreements for 15 years. I told her everything. She told me to send her my current contract immediately, not to sign anything, and not to let anyone touch the system's core repository without documentation. "And Arthur," she said before she hung up, "don't let them rattle you. Your position is much stronger than they probably realize." October moved quickly. I came into the office every day. I did my work. I was professional and even pleasant to Brennan in the hallways, which cost me something, I'll admit. He had the particular energy of someone who has recently discovered authority. A kind of brightness in the eyes, a habit of speaking just slightly too loudly. The staff around him had the careful posture of people who hadn't figured out yet what kind of boss he was going to be. On the 29th of October, I received a calendar invite for a meeting scheduled the following morning. The subject line said, "Licensing Partnership Review, Westridge and Northern Plains Pipelines." Westridge and Northern Plains were 2 of our 3 licensing clients. This was, as far as I understood it, a standard check-in ahead of the renewal cycle. I confirmed my attendance and thought nothing more of it. I should have thought more of it. I arrived at the boardroom at 9 in the morning. Our Westridge contact, a senior VP I'd worked with for 6 years, was already there with 2 colleagues. The Northern Plains rep arrived a few minutes later. We had coffee. There was the comfortable ease of people who had done good business together for a long time. Brennan walked in at 9:15, and he did not walk in alone. He had 2 people from HR with him, and he had a folder. He didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, my end of the table, where I was sitting. And he said, in a voice that was working very hard to sound casual, "Arthur, I need to ask you to step out for a moment. There are some personnel matters we need to address before we get started." I looked at the Westridge VP. She was looking at the table. I looked at Brennan. "We have clients in the room. I'm aware. This will only take a moment." He was not looking at me the way a person looks at someone they want to be kind to. He was looking at me the way someone looks at a problem they've decided to solve. I stood up. I carried my coffee. I walked out into the hallway with him and the two HR people, and one of them, a woman I'd never seen before, handed me a letter. Termination of employment. Effective immediately. The reasons cited were vague: organizational restructuring and strategic realignment of operational responsibilities. No performance issues. No misconduct. Just the clean, corporate language of someone being erased. "This is effective today," Brennan said. He was not smiling, but there was something underneath his expression that wanted to be. "You've thought this through," I said. "We have. The renewal meeting is in 2 weeks. We're aware of the timeline." I stood there in that hallway for a moment. I could hear, through the boardroom door, the muffled sound of someone pouring coffee and making small talk. The Westridge VP's voice, carefully neutral. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten anyone. I had learned a long time ago in this industry that the most powerful thing you can say in a room or a hallway is nothing. I took the letter. I said, "I'll need to speak with legal." "Of course," Brennan said. "HR will connect you with the process." I walked back to my office. I packed the things that mattered. A photo of Kelsey from before all of this, a coffee mug my team had given me years ago, a small carved soapstone bear that had sat on my desk since my first year at Norwest. I left everything else. I was in the parking lot by 10:15. I called Deborah from the car. "They did it," I said. A short pause. "When?" "This morning." "Effective date?" "Today. November 13th. Another pause. Longer this time. "Arthur," she said, "do you understand what they just did?" "I have a pretty good idea. They just fired you 2 days before the renewal payment triggers, and the renewal requires your signature and your active involvement to execute per the terms of the licensing agreement, which they apparently did not read carefully enough. That's my understanding as well. And the core IP clause is still active, untouched, as far as I know." I could hear her breathing for a moment, and then she said something she had probably never said to a client before. "Don't worry about a thing. This is going to be fine." Here's what Brennan did not understand about the system I built. The licensing agreements with Westridge, Northern Plains, and the third operator, a company out of Fort St. John, were structured in a way that reflected the IP arrangement in my employment contract. Norwest could license the system to external parties, but the licenses themselves referenced my ownership of the core architecture. There was a clause, clear, unambiguous, drafted by lawyers on both sides, stating that any material changes to the licensing structure, including renewals, required written consent from me as the originating rights holder. The licenses were up for renewal on November 15th. Without my signature, the renewal could not proceed. Without renewal, the licensing agreements would lapse into a 30-day grace period, after which the operators would be in breach if they continued using the system. Norwest, having just fired me, had no mechanism to compel my cooperation. I was no longer an employee. The contract they'd terminated included the non-disparagement and non-compete clauses they probably thought would neuter me. But it did not, could not, strip me of my IP rights. That would have required a separate negotiated agreement, with compensation, which they had not sought. Deborah sent a letter to Norwest's legal team on November 14th. It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph noted my termination and its effective date. The second paragraph cited the relevant clauses of my employment contract and the licensing agreements. The third paragraph advised that I would not be signing the renewal documentation without a full renegotiation of the terms of my departure, including the $112,000 payment, reinstatement of my revenue share entitlements through the end of the fiscal year, and a full and final settlement. Norwest's lawyers called Deborah within 4 hours. I found out what happened in that boardroom from the Westridge VP, who was a decent person, and called me a week later. Apparently, the meeting on October 30th had proceeded after I left in a fairly normal fashion. Brennan had introduced himself, talked about Norwest's new direction, made some remarks about operational efficiency. The Westridge team had been polite. They'd asked about the renewal timeline. Brennan had assured them everything was on track. It was not on track. On November 15th, the renewal date, Norwest's operations team sent over the standard renewal documentation package. The operators reviewed it. Their legal teams flagged the IP clause almost immediately. They asked for confirmation of my sign-off. Norwest could not provide it. Within 48 hours, both Westridge and Northern Plains had sent formal notices requesting clarification of the licensing status. The Fort St. John operator sent a more pointed letter expressing concern about business continuity. Brennan, from what the Westridge VP told me, was not handling it well. The call she described, where apparently he phoned someone on Norwest's board and could be heard down the hallway, was later summarized to me by Deborah after she spoke with Norwest's legal team. His central question, apparently repeated several times, was, "How is this possible? How does he still have this?" The answer was, because no one had read the contract carefully enough before they handed that folder to an HR person and told them to find me in a boardroom. The settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate. I will not go into every detail, but I will say this. I received the $112,000. I received a buyout of my remaining revenue share entitlements that was substantially more generous than what I would have received in the ordinary course of my employment. I received a clean reference and a mutual non-disparagement agreement, and I retained, as I had always retained, the intellectual property rights to the core architecture, which Norwest then properly licensed from me under a new agreement on terms that Deborah negotiated with considerably more leverage than anyone at that company had anticipated. I did not ask for an apology. I didn't think one would mean very much at that point. And I've never been someone who needs a lot of ceremony around things being made right. What I had wanted since that morning in the parking lot was simply for the record to reflect what was actually true. That I had built something valuable. That the value didn't disappear because someone handed me a letter and told me to go home. That 31 years in this industry had taught me, above almost everything else, to read what I signed and to understand exactly what I owned. Kelsey and I talked, eventually. It was not an easy conversation. She loves her husband, and she should. That's not something I'd ever want to be in the way of. But she also knows me. She knew, before I said anything, that I wasn't angry so much as I was sad that it had become this, that business had crossed into something that felt like family choosing sides. She came to my house one Saturday morning in December with 2 coffees from the place on the corner that she knows I like. We sat at my kitchen table and we talked for a long time, not about the money or the lawyers or any of it, just about what mattered. At some point, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine and said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told her there was nothing to be sorry for. She knew I didn't entirely mean it. She knows me too well for that. But she also knew that I meant the part underneath it. The part that said, "We'll be okay. Whatever Brennan and I are now, whatever that working relationship might have become, Kelsey and I are something that doesn't get renegotiated." Terrence had finished his beer by the time I got to the end of it. The Flames had won, though neither of us had been paying close attention. "So what's the takeaway?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Know what you own," I said. "That's it, really. I didn't do anything clever. I didn't outmaneuver anybody. I just knew what was mine, and I didn't let anyone tell me it wasn't." He nodded slowly. "And the contract. And the contract. Read everything. Keep copies. Have a lawyer who answers her phone." He flagged the bartender down for another round. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said. "What?" "I like that job. I genuinely liked going in every day. I would have stayed until I was 65 if they'd let me. That's the thing that gets me. They didn't have to do it this way. If Brennan had come to me in September and said, 'Help me understand this system, help me think about how to evolve it,' we might have built something even better together. There was room for that. But he didn't. No, he decided he already knew enough. The hockey highlights were running on the screen above the bar. Outside, Crowchild Trail was lit up in the dark, the familiar sprawl of the city moving quietly past. "You're not bitter," Terrence said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," I said, and I meant it. "Bitter is expensive. I've got better things to spend that on." He raised his glass. I raised mine. And that was the end of it. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the money or the lawyers or even the look on Brennan's face in that hallway. It's the quiet, That specific quiet I felt driving out of the Norwest parking lot on a Tuesday morning in November, with a cardboard box in my passenger seat and 31 years behind me. I didn't feel destroyed. I felt, strangely, like something had just clarified. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim, where the lesson is about how unfair things can be, how nepotism poisons good companies, how hard work doesn't protect you, and those things are all true in their way. But that's not really the story I lived. What I actually lived was this: a man who had spent decades doing his work carefully, reading what he signed, understanding what he owned, and when the moment came, that preparation was the only thing that mattered. Not connections, not seniority, not the fact that I'd given 19 years to that company. Just the contract, and knowing what was in it. Brennan was smart in a lot of ways. He understood deals, timelines, leverage. What he didn't understand was that knowing something isn't the same as understanding it. He looked at my system and saw a company asset. He never stopped to ask whose name was actually on it. That gap between what he assumed and what was actually true cost Norwest more than I think any of them have fully added up yet. I think about integrity a lot differently now than I did in my 30s. When I was younger, I thought of it mostly as a moral quality. Being honest, keeping your word, not cutting corners. And it is that. But it's also something more practical than people give it credit for. When you do your work with real care, when you document properly and understand your agreements and never let yourself be rushed into something you haven't thought through, you're not just being a good person, you're building a position. Quietly, over years, you're building something that holds. That's what I had, and no one can take it because I'd never been careless enough to let it slip away in the first place. The resilience part is harder to talk about, not because I don't believe in it, but because I don't think it looks the way people expect. It wasn't defiance. I didn't go home that November night and make a plan to fight back. I went home, called Deborah, fed my dog, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Resilience, I've found, is mostly about not catastrophizing. It's about trusting the work you've already done. It's about knowing that panic is expensive and patience is free. Kelsey and I are okay. That matters more to me than any of the rest of it. Whatever Brennan and I are now. And I genuinely don't know what that is. She and I have the kind of relationship that doesn't get restructured. If there's anything I'd say to someone watching this who sees something of their own situation in mine, it's just know what you own. Not in an aggressive way. Not as a weapon. Just understand the terms of your own life. Read the documents. Ask the questions. Don't assume that because things have been fine, they'll stay fine without you paying attention. The companies don't owe you that attention, but you owe it to yourself.